An old dog once praised as a hero, now thrown away like yesterday's trash. No badge, no handler, only frozen paws and empty eyes staring through the glass of a five-star restaurant. Inside, warmth, laughter, and shining plates. Outside, only snow, hunger, and silence. No one stopped. No one cared. Until one stranger did. A middle-aged veteran, hardened by years of duty but quietly broken inside, saw what no one else could. In those tired eyes still lived duty, loyalty, and loss. What happened next left everyone speechless. Because this isn't just a story about a stray looking for food. It's about a forgotten hero, one who helped solve a case no one else could, just to thank the man who gave him a second chance. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe every living soul deserves respect, not abandonment, hit subscribe because the story you're about to hear will stay in your heart forever. Snow fell over Belridge like it had been waiting years to erase sound itself. The streets gleamed silver under the weight of frost. The lamps along Main flickered, and every shopfront had turned to glass and gold. Through one of those windows, tall, flawless, and framed by cedar beams, the hearth and vine pulsed with laughter and the hum of jazz. The smell of roasted elk and melted butter drifted through every seam, wrapping around the chatter like perfume. Inside, warmth was an art form. Couples leaned close over wine glasses, friends clinked forks against dessert plates, and somewhere near the bar, a man raised his glass for a toast. The fireplace threw light against the ceiling, and it looked, from the outside, like a place where sorrow had been outlawed. Outside, the snow whispered another story. A German shepherd, old and hollowed by time, stood pressed against the cold glass. His fur was mottled with ash and frost, thin enough to show the ridges of his ribs. One ear hung half-torn, the other twitching to sounds he still recognized. Forks, laughter, music, everything that used to mean life. He had once worn a badge, once had a name spoken with pride. Now he was just a shadow breathing fog on a window. He didn't look at the people. He looked at the food. Steam rose from a plate of roast duck. Garlic bread gleamed under candlelight. A child inside licked honey from her fingers, and something deep in the dog's memory stirred. Mess halls, kind hands, commands said with trust. He blinked, then raised one paw and tapped the glass. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was small, smaller than mercy, smaller than hope. No one heard. A waiter in a black vest glanced at him, frowned, and turned away. A woman shifted to take a better photo of her dessert. A man laughed too loud at a joke that wasn't funny. The world went on eating, pretending not to notice the creature watching them from the dark. The dog lowered his paw and stayed still. Snow gathered along his back, melting into his fur, freezing again. He was used to that rhythm. Warmth leaving, cold returning, and no one staying long enough to change it. Then the door swung open. A rush of heat escaped, followed by a man's irritated voice. "Not again," the waiter muttered. He carried a tray of leftover food, half-eaten steaks, bones, a piece of bread still glistening with butter. He kicked the door wider, stepping into the alley beside the restaurant. The light poured out around him, golden and cruel. "Go on," he barked, waving a rag as if chasing a rat. "Get out of here." He tilted the tray and dumped everything into the metal bin. Plates clattered. Food splattered across the snow. One baked potato rolled to the shepherd's paws. The dog flinched, but didn't move away. His tail curled tighter beneath him. His breath steamed once, then faded. The waiter clicked his tongue, muttering, "Disgusting." before slamming the door. The light vanished, the street swallowed on the sound. For a moment, everything went still again, until the crunch of boots broke through the wind. Across the street, a tall man in a dark patrol coat had stopped walking. His name was Raymond Cole, 55, retired Army veteran and now part-time deputy in Belridge. His gait carried the weight of years in the field. One leg stiff, one shoulder slightly sunken, but his posture remained deliberate, controlled. The kind of man who'd learned that pain could be quiet if you asked it to. Beside him walked Samuel, his 8-year-old son. The boy's face was pale from the cold, his breath a small cloud in the dim light. He wore a wool cap too big for his head and clutched a paper bag close to his chest. Inside were a few slices of bread, leftovers from their supper at a diner 2 blocks away. His right arm, wooden and carefully carved by his father, peeked from beneath his sleeve as he tightened his grip on the bag. Samuel stopped first, his eyes locked on the dog. "Dad," he whispered. "He looks cold." Raymond followed the boy's gaze. For a long moment, he didn't move. The shepherd stood framed in the restaurant's light, his breath fogging the glass, the baked potato still lying untouched in the snow. Raymond's eyes softened, but his jaw stayed set. He'd seen that stance before, the quiet surrender of something that used to fight for life. "Stay here," he said. Samuel nodded, his small face half lit by the street lamp. Raymond crossed the road, boots cracking through the ice. The snow brushed against his coat, his breath forming ghosts in the air. He stopped in front of the dog and crouched. Close up, the animal smelled of smoke and rain, of days spent walking without rest. His eyes were amber, tired but alert. Raymond reached into the paper bag he carried in his pocket and pulled out a piece of bread. He set it gently on the snow. "You don't have to ask, soldier," he murmured. "Eat." The shepherd hesitated, as if waiting for permission from a voice long gone. Then quietly, he stepped forward, head low, and took the bread in his mouth. No snarl, no noise. Just the sound of trust returning in the smallest way. Raymond watched in silence. The dog ate slowly, as if afraid the world might take this from him too. Snow landed on both their shoulders, 2 silhouettes, one man, one beast, bound by something wordless. Across the street, Samuel's eyes shone through the falling flakes. He hugged the bag tighter, watching as his father brushed snow from the dog's head. "You've seen some things, haven't you?" Raymond said softly. The shepherd looked up. For a second, it almost seemed like he understood. And then, a voice shattered the quiet. "Hey, get that mud out of here!" It came from the restaurant doorway, sharp as breaking glass. The waiter stood there again, framed in gold light, anger creasing his face. His breath fogged the air as he pointed toward Raymond and the dog. "This is private property!" The shepherd flinched, ears flattening. Raymond rose slowly, turning to face the man. His voice didn't rise, but something behind his eyes did. An old fire, the kind that could burn through any storm. For a moment, no one moved. The waiter's hand still pointed. Snow spiraled down between them. The shepherd stayed close to Raymond's leg, trembling but not retreating. The door slammed shut again. Silence returned, heavy and wide. Raymond exhaled through his nose, the sound low, deliberate. "Easy, soldier," he whispered. "They don't know who you are." The dog blinked once, a faint spark of recognition flickering in his tired eyes. And there, in the middle of a street buried in snow, a veteran and an old canine stood together, one forgotten by war, one forgotten by the world, as the night folded around them like a secret waiting to be told. Snow pressed down heavier that night, a white hush swallowing the streets of Belridge. The restaurant door burst open, spilling golden light before the wind slammed it shut again. Russ Baker appeared, broad-shouldered, red-faced, apron stained with grease, a wooden spoon gripped like a weapon. "Filthy strays, every week!" he shouted, slamming the dumpster lid so hard the sound cracked through the frozen air. The German shepherd didn't growl or bare his teeth. He simply lowered his head, tail tucked beneath him, and took a small step back. His body trembled, not from fear, but from an old kind of shame, the kind that comes from being hurt too many times to fight back. Raymond Cole stood nearby, snow melting on his shoulders. His voice came out calm, the tone of a man used to being obeyed. "That's enough." Russ turned, startled. He caught sight of the faded military patch on Raymond's sleeve, the one with the eagle half torn but still proud. His anger faltered. "I wasn't going to hit him," he muttered, his breath fogging in the cold. "You just did," Raymond replied quietly. The words fell heavy. Russ dropped the spoon into the snow, turned away, and disappeared back inside. Behind Raymond, Samuel crouched down. The boy's cheeks glowed pink beneath his wool hat. In his carved wooden hand, he held out a crust of bread. "It's okay," he whispered. The dog hesitated, eyes darting between the boy's hand and his face, then stepped forward and took the bread gently. Samuel smiled, a fragile smile, soft as thawing ice. Raymond hadn't seen that smile all winter. The old shepherd chewed slowly, the faint glow of the lamplight catching the steam of his breath. Raymond knelt beside him. Up close, he noticed the matted fur, the thin frame, the smell of smoke tangled in the dog's coat. When he brushed his glove across the animal's neck, something rough and cold scraped his palm. Metal, half buried under the fur. He wiped away the grime. A tag, blackened, warped by fire. He rubbed his thumb across its surface until faint letters emerged. K9. The rest was burned away. Raymond's breath caught. He turned the tag over, the edges jagged like a wound. The marks told a story he didn't need words for. A blast, maybe. A mission gone wrong. The shepherd wasn't a stray. He was a soldier, forgotten, discarded, left behind when the smoke cleared. Raymond looked up at the dog again. There was no fear in those brown eyes, only the stillness of something that had endured too much and survived anyway. "You've been through it, haven't you?" he murmured. The shepherd didn't move. He simply watched him. And for the first time that night, Raymond felt like he was being studied in return. A gust of wind howled down the alley. Samuel stood, wiping snow from his gloves. "Dad, he's not like other dogs." Raymond nodded slowly. His fingers closed around the metal tag, its burned edges pressing against his skin. "No," he said softly. "He's not." The boy turned toward the street. "Can we go home now?" Raymond rose to his feet. "Yeah, let's go." They started walking, the crunch of their boots the only sound. But after a few paces, Raymond heard another rhythm, faint, soft, steady. He turned. The shepherd had risen, following them at a distance. His paws sank into the snow, leaving fresh tracks alongside theirs. Every few steps he stopped, waiting, patient, uncertain. Samuel turned, eyes wide. "Dad, he's following us." Raymond's jaw tightened, then softened. He didn't smile, not quite, but something eased in his face. "Then let him." The three figures, man, boy, and dog, disappeared down the snowy road. The town's lamplight dimmed behind them, swallowed by the storm. Their footprints wove together, 3 trails side by side, stretching toward the quiet hills of Belridge. And when the wind finally died, the faint jingle of the burned tag was all that remained. The sound of loyalty refusing to fade. The fire crackled softly inside the cabin, its light bending across rough wooden walls and the deep grooves of a life well worn. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, carrying with it the faint scent of snow and ash. Raymond sat near the hearth, his shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the object in his hands, the collar. It was scorched at the edges, warped by flame, but the metal still caught the firelight. Samuel slept curled beneath a wool blanket, his breath slow and even, the faint creak of his wooden arm resting beside him. And next to the boy, the shepherd lay motionless, his head gently pressed against the child's side, his chest rising and falling with quiet rhythm. Raymond turned the collar over with steady fingers, scraping away the last of the soot with the back of a knife. Bit by bit, the letters began to reveal themselves, faint at first, then clearer in the firelight. K9 Max, Colorado State Police. The veteran's breath caught. His thumb lingered over the name. Max. He whispered it aloud, as if testing a memory. Somewhere deep inside, a door opened, the kind that leads backward, into desert sand and the echo of gunfire. He'd seen dogs like this before, loyal shadows running through smoke and ruin, never questioning, never retreating. Soldiers without words. The shepherd stirred slightly at the sound of his name, lifting his head for a moment before laying it back down near Samuel's arm. The boy shifted in his sleep, his wooden hand resting against Max's neck as though they'd always belonged to the same story. Raymond watched them, the wounded child, the broken dog, and something in the lines of his face softened. He leaned closer to the fire, murmuring, "You've seen things, haven't you, old boy?" The logs hissed. Sparks drifted up like ghosts of old battles. Raymond sat back in the creaking chair, the collar in his lap, the shadows dancing across his scarred hands. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like a truce. Morning arrived pale and cold. Frost clung to the cabin windows, tracing veins of white along the glass. Raymond stood by the door, pulling on his coat, while Max waited quietly beside him, tail still but eyes alert. Samuel rubbed his eyes, sitting up beneath the blanket. "You're taking him somewhere?" the boy asked, voice still heavy with sleep. "To a friend," Raymond said, "someone who might help." They stepped out into the thin light. The road to town was half buried in snow, and the sound of their boots echoed faintly in the quiet. By the time they reached the small clinic near the edge of Belridge, the sun was a pale smear behind the clouds. A wooden sign hung by the door, its paint cracked and fading. Eli Warren, DVM. Dr. Eli Warren opened the door before Raymond could knock. He was a man in his early 60s, tall but stooped slightly from years spent leaning over tables and tending to things that couldn't speak. His hair, once black, had gone silver at the temples. His eyes, a calm gray, carried the steady patience of someone who'd seen enough suffering to stop asking why. He wore a thick sweater under a denim apron, and his hands were rough, scarred, and sure. "Ray," Eli said, voice deep and measured. "It's been a while." "Too long," Raymond replied. He stepped aside as Max entered, the dog moving with cautious grace, head low but not fearful. Eli's eyes softened. "He's been through hell," he murmured. "Yeah," Raymond said quietly. "We both have." Inside, the clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine. A small heater hummed in the corner. Eli guided Max onto the examination table, his movements gentle. Easy, boy, he said, running a hand along the shepherd's neck. The scanner beeped once as it passed over the burned skin beneath the fur. Then again, louder this time. A small screen flickered to life, pale blue against the dim room. ID 9C4882CHQ, Shadow, call sign Max. Handler, Sergeant David Moreno, deceased. Status, missing in action, presumed dead. Eli frowned, leaning closer. This can't be right. He turned the screen toward Raymond, who stood motionless, his jaw tightening. The system says this dog disappeared after the Fort Carson explosion, 2 years ago. His handler was killed in the blast. Raymond's eyes moved from the glowing text to the dog lying calmly before him. Max looked back, unblinking, the reflection of the monitor flickering in his eyes like small blue flames. Eli exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. They never found the dog. They assumed he died in the fire. Raymond didn't answer. He reached out, resting a hand on Max's shoulder. The fur was coarse beneath his palm, but steady, warm, alive. He's not missing, Raymond said softly. He just hadn't found his way home yet. For a moment, neither man spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Samuel sat quietly near the door, swinging his wooden hand back and forth, watching Max with the kind of wonder only a child can hold, as if he was seeing proof that miracles, somehow, still happen. Eli finally turned back to the monitor, his brows knit. "Ray," he said, voice lower now. "This case, it was never closed." The words hung between them, heavy as the wind outside. The fire in Raymond's chest flickered. Not warmth this time, but the faint spark of something else. Recognition. Or maybe the beginning of a reckoning. The next afternoon, the light fell weak and gray across the mountains as Raymond's old truck rumbled down the frozen road. The storm had begun to stir again, dragging long ribbons of snow through the sky like tattered flags. Inside the cab, Max stood alert in the passenger seat, his breath misting the window. The wind outside howled against the metal skeletons of half-built structures up ahead, an abandoned construction site long forgotten, where silence had learned to echo. Raymond cut the engine, the sound dying into a hush that felt older than the snow itself. Max jumped down first. His paws sank into the powder with a muted crunch, nose low to the ground, every movement deliberate. The shepherd's body was a map of old training, muscles tense, tail straight, eyes sharp. Raymond followed close behind, boots sinking deep, breath visible in the cold air. Around them, the unfinished buildings loomed like the ribs of some great beast, hollow and waiting. Wind slipped through gaps in the metal frames, making a sound almost human, a ghostly whistle, as if the place were remembering how to breathe. "Go ahead, boy," Raymond murmured, voice low but steady. Max obeyed without hesitation, weaving between broken beams and drifts of snow. The dog paused at intervals, nose twitching, as though piecing together a puzzle left years ago. They passed a pile of rusted rebar, a frozen generator, then a section of cracked concrete half buried in ice. Raymond's flashlight swept over faded warning signs, shards of glass, a discarded boot stiff with frost. Finally, Max stopped. He pawed once at the ground, then again, a precise, almost ritual motion. Raymond felt the air tighten. "What is it?" he asked softly, crouching down beside him. His gloved hands brushed away the top layer of snow, then the next. Beneath the frost, something rough scraped against his knuckles. Canvas. He dug faster, pulling free a weathered bag, stiff with cold and half buried in frozen mud. Raymond unzipped it carefully. Inside were a pair of leather gloves, a set of bolt cutters, and a badge dulled by time. He wiped it with his thumb until the letters came clear in the light. Officer Greg Hansen. The air seemed to thicken. Hansen, missing 6 weeks ago. Raymond frowned, brow tightening. The math didn't make sense. Max's case, 2 years old. Hansen's disappearance, barely over a month. 2 different ghosts, but one trail. He turned the badge over, tracing the edge with his thumb. His mind worked through possibilities, wrong records, a coincidence, or something much darker threading them together. He could almost feel Eli's warning echoing in his head. This case was never closed. The wind picked up again, driving needles of ice through his coat. Max stiffened beside him, ears pricked forward, tail lowering. Then came a smell, faint but unmistakable, sharp, metallic, almost sweet, like burnt wires and chemical dust. Raymond froze. The scent hit him in a way that no memory ever should. He'd smelled it before, long ago in desert heat and the aftermath of explosions. His pulse quickened. "No," he whispered, then glanced down at Max. The dog's muscles were drawn tight as wire, nose lifted, body rigid. "You remember, don't you?" Raymond said, his voice little more than breath. Max's gaze flicked toward the ridgeline beyond the site, every nerve alive. The shepherd took a step forward, then another, moving with the quiet authority of something reborn into purpose. The veteran rose slowly, scanning the expanse around them. The snow swirled thicker now, whiting out the edges of the world. It was as if the mountain itself was holding its breath, the storm gathering memories it didn't want to keep. Raymond could feel it, a strange, living pulse beneath the ground, the weight of truth waiting to surface. Then, through the curtain of snow, something moved, a flicker of shadow between the skeletal frames, tall, human, fast. For a heartbeat, the figure was there, a silhouette slipping between trees at the ridge, coat whipping in the wind. Then gone. Raymond's instincts kicked in. "Max!" he hissed. The dog's ears snapped toward the sound, body coiled to chase. But the storm swallowed everything, the scent, the shape, the distance. Only the empty wind answered back, howling through steel like a warning. Raymond stood still, every sense awake. His gloved hand tightened around the badge until the metal bit into his palm. Snow fell heavier now, muffling the world in white. And in that cold, breathless silence, one thought burned clear in his mind. Whatever had started 2 years ago wasn't over. It had simply been waiting for someone to come back. By the time dusk settled over Belridge, the quarry looked like a graveyard carved from ice. Wind tore through the floodlights, turning every falling flake into a shard of glass. Raymond stood near the edge of the pit, collar pulled high, the badge of Officer Hansen heavy in his pocket. Beside him, Max sat motionless, a dark silhouette against a world of white. The air carried the metallic scent of snow and tension, the quiet before the storm decided to speak. Headlights cut through the twilight. A government SUV rolled to a stop, its engine growling low. Captain Maria Alvarez stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, her silver-streaked hair tucked neatly under a dark police hat. Her face was drawn, the kind of calm that came from too many years of bad news. In one gloved hand, she carried a thin folder, corners curled and wet from the snow. She stopped beside Raymond, her voice low but sure. "You were right," she said, handing him the folder. The fingerprints matched Lyle Benjamin Hargrove. Raymond's jaw tightened. That name wasn't new. It was a ghost from Fort Carson, a name he'd hoped to never hear again. "The one who killed Moreno?" he asked. Alvarez's eyes flickered beneath the brim of her hat. "The same," she said simply. The words seemed to slice through the wind, sharper than the cold itself. 2 years ago, Lyle Hargrove had been a soldier, an army engineer with a mind for machinery and a soul twisted by greed. He turned rogue, building explosives for cartels and smugglers, selling death by the pound. It was his design that tore through Fort Carson, killing Sergeant David Moreno and leveling the narcotics depot. He was presumed dead, buried beneath the wreckage. But death, it seemed, had been just another disguise. He resurfaced as Travis Cole, blending into the noise of small towns and construction crews. The same hands that wired bombs now welded beams. He sold demolition materials off the books, traded silence for money. And when Officer Hansen got too close, Hargrove silenced him too, burying his badge and his past beneath the snow. Now, he'd come back to Belridge, not by accident, but with purpose. The quarry was to be reclaimed, the soil overturned. He needed to erase what was left of Fort Carson, one final loose end before the truth rose from the earth. He thought time had buried his crimes. He didn't know one old canine still remembered his scent. When the task force arrived, the snow came with it, thick, howling, relentless. The floodlights flickered against the wind. Alvarez barked orders through the radio, her voice calm amid chaos. "Units A and B, take the North Ridge. Raymond, you're with me." Then, the explosion hit. A thunderous roar split the air, shaking the ground beneath them. Shards of light, smoke, and snow erupted skyward. "Down!" Alvarez shouted. The shockwave knocked Raymond off balance. He landed hard, the breath torn from his chest. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Max's bark, deep, urgent, alive. Hargrove had set a diversion. The bastard was running. Through the storm, Max's head shot up. His ears flicked once, a signal Raymond hadn't seen in years, not since the desert. He knew what it meant. Target located. "Go," Raymond whispered. Max bolted into the whiteout, his body vanishing into wind and ice like a shadow reclaiming its shape. Raymond followed, lungs burning, snow slicing against his face. Gunfire cracked somewhere ahead. Muffled, scattered, desperate. A bullet grazed his arm, ripping his sleeve open. He stumbled, rolled, and pushed himself back to his feet. Then he heard it, Max's bark, sharp and steady, cutting through the chaos. A man's voice answered, ragged and furious. "Stay back." But the snow didn't listen. It swallowed his voice whole. Out of the blizzard, Max lunged. The German shepherd hit Hargrove full force, teeth gripping his sleeve, weight driving him into the snow. The gun spun free, clattering uselessly. They struggled, one fighting for freedom, the other for justice long delayed. Raymond reached them seconds later, gun drawn, breath tearing from his lungs. But he stopped. Max stood over Hargrove, fur bristled, chest heaving, eyes burning with recognition, the memory of Fort Carson alive in that gaze. Hargrove froze, trembling, the snow streaked with the fear of a man who'd run out of places to hide. You were supposed to be dead," he gasped. Raymond stepped closer, lowering his weapon, his voice low but resolute. "So was justice." The words hung in the storm like scripture. Hargrove's body sagged, hands trembling as the cuffs locked tight. The wind quieted. The mountain exhaled. Raymond knelt beside Max, brushing snow from his muzzle, the warmth of his hand steady against the dog's fur. "You brought him home, partner," he whispered. In the distance, Alvarez stood near her truck, radio crackling softly. "Case Fort Carson," she said into the mic. "Status resolved." And for the first time in 2 long years, Max closed his eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from peace. The storm had broken at last. Morning came quietly, brushing Belridge in a pale gold glow that softened every scar the town had earned. Snow clung to rooftops like lace, and sunlight streamed through the windows of the police station, where warmth, cedar, and quiet reverence filled the air. Inside the hall, rows of uniforms glimmered beneath the flags. On the far wall hung the faces of those who had served, among them Sergeant David Moreno, whose steady eyes looked down from a black and white frame. Below that portrait stood a German shepherd, fur still streaked with white scars, tail curled neatly around his paws. Pshh. Captain Maria Alvarez walked to the front, her polished boots echoing softly. She was tall, proud, the silver in her hair catching the light. In her hands, she carried a velvet box, dark against her uniform. Her voice, when it came, was steady, neither command nor ceremony, but remembrance. 2 years ago, a man lost his life doing his duty, she began, and his partner vanished in the fire. She turned toward Max. But duty doesn't die with the man. Sometimes it waits, it remembers, until justice is ready to be found. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of awe and ache. Raymond stood beside Samuel in the front row. The boy's wooden hand rested on Max's neck, his small fingers brushing through fur that still smelled faintly of smoke and snow. Alvarez opened the box. Inside lay a silver tag, polished, engraved, glinting like morning frost. She knelt in front of Max, meeting his eyes. "For courage beyond command," she said quietly. "For loyalty that refused to fade. And for remembering what we almost forgot." She fastened the tag to his collar. Honorary K-9 Deputy, Belridge Police Department. The applause came slow, then swelled like a tide breaking through grief. Officers rose to their feet. Veterans saluted. Raymond felt his throat tighten as Max straightened, chest lifted, gaze steady, not at the crowd, but at the photograph of Sergeant Moreno hanging above them. For a moment his ears twitched, and his tail wagged once. Gentle, deliberate, like a final salute to the man who had once called his name. Alvarez's eyes softened. "Welcome home, Deputy," she said. Later that evening, twilight draped the mountains in lavender and ash. At the cabin beyond town, the fire crackled behind frosted windows. Raymond sat on the porch with a mug of coffee. Samuel nestled against his side, and Max curled at their feet. The air was clean, carrying only the scent of pine and peace. "Dad?" Samuel asked softly. "He's staying with us, right?" Raymond smiled. "Yeah, son," he said. "He's home now." Inside, the fire whispered against the silence, no longer lonely, just alive. The warmth pressed softly through the walls, and for the first time in a long time, Raymond didn't hear the ghosts of command, only the sound of breathing, steady, shared. Later that night, when the boy had fallen asleep, Raymond stepped outside again. The snow was falling lightly, spinning in the porch light. Max followed him out, stretching, then lying down beside his boots. Raymond looked toward the ridge where the storm had ended and justice had been found. "You didn't just close a case, old boy," he murmured. "You carried his memory home." Max's eyes lifted to the stars, where the night shimmered in silver threads. He exhaled, long and quiet, as if releasing the last of the burden he'd carried through the years. Above them, the snow fell slower, soft, forgiving, eternal. It covered the scars, not to erase them, but to honor what they'd endured. And as the fire's glow reached the porch, wrapping them both in gold. Raymond whispered one last truth. Some heroes don't need words. They just remember. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They linger in the sound of boots brushing snow, in the steady breath of a loyal friend asleep by the fire, in the quiet corners of our hearts where courage never needed a witness. We live in a world that often forgets the gentle ones, the soldiers who came home but never spoke of it, the dogs who carried faith in their eyes long after commands stopped coming, the children who learned that love sometimes looks like simply staying. Loyalty doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits, beside us, through the storm, until the light returns. And when it does, we remember that not every hero stands in the sun. Some walk quietly through the cold, leaving warmth behind for the rest of us. So if tonight feels a little too silent, listen closer. You might still hear the echo of a heart that never stopped believing, a reminder that bravery can live in silence, and that even in the snow, hope has a way of finding its way home.